Australia's role in the COP31 climate summit, April.
Yeah, and this is positioning, of course, for COP31, given how it has a sort of failed bid. Now it will be hosting this along with Turkey. Australia has stepped back from this bid to host the COP31 climate summit in Adelaide, and instead this compromise with rival bidder Turkey. And this will see this 2026 talk staged in Antalya. Australia, of course, won't be the venue, and this will still shape the agenda, though. That seems to be the expectation, with Climate and Energy Minister Chris Bowen presiding over 2 weeks of negotiations. And we know how Pacific nations are also set to host a pre-COP event. Australia is seeking to establish itself as a clean energy superpower and signal that it's addressing a key security threat to its Pacific partners. Let's discuss with Eliza Northrop, Director at University of New South Wales Sydney Centre for Sustainable Development Reform. Eliza, good to see you. Talk to us first about the priorities for Australia in bidding to host COP31 and now not going along with that bid, even though it's going to be co-hosting it in a way with Turkey. Does that shift the conversations and the way in which it can kind of corral the 200 or so countries that it'll need to do?
Yeah, so this has been a really long-standing, very drawn-out bid process over a number of years now, with Australia being very vocal that this was intended to be a joint COP with the Pacific. This was going to be a regionally focused COP, really offering an opportunity for Australia and the Pacific to come together and advance climate ambition. I think with Australia really hoping that that this process can be used to strengthen political ties and relationships with the Pacific and catch up really, I think, on the last 10 plus years where Australia hasn't always advanced the most ambitious climate policy. So a tremendously important opportunity for Australia and the Pacific. And that was very much how COP31 was framed. And I think even Minister Bowen's spoken about that recently, that desire to really use COP31 as a platform to elevate Pacific priorities and Pacific voice.
You talk about the political partnerships. It's not known for being close to Turkey. How might this affect, the way these negotiations will be had? How will that partnership actually work?
So I think we are entering sort of really uncharted, unprecedented territory over the next year. The phrase, two's company, three's a crowd comes to mind. Heading into the bid, it was very much that partnership, as I said, Australia and the Pacific working out how to navigate a joint presidency and elevate priorities for both perspectives. Now we have, a third country in the mix, a split presidency. So it's very clear now that Turkey will continue to not only host, but they are the COP31 president to manage the entire event, including the action agenda. And it has sort of delegated responsibility, the presidency role over a subset of COP31, which is the negotiations, to Australia. So it's gone from a situation where we had a joint presidency potentially between the Pacific and Australia to now really that joint presidency and that relationship needing to be managed between Turkey and Australia, with the Pacific now being sort of offered the pre-COP, which is a very different arrangement than what has been promised and really worked towards over the last couple of years. And as we've seen, the Pacific have been really, really strong advocates in supporting Australia's bid. So I think they are very much left in an uncertain position. I think the pre-COP is a very important moment in the lead up to the COP, but I think it's very much now up to Australia as to how can it find ways to make sure that the Pacific still remains part of that core COP30 or has a presence on that core COP31 stage and can advance its priorities, particularly around some of these key elements of ambition and particularly mitigation, ambition and phasing out of fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, how important will it be for Australia? How much is at stake now to make an impact in those conversations pre-COP, given, of course, the big blow that this was, that they didn't get to host it, but they're sharing presidency? It's a pretty messy arrangement.
It is a very messy arrangement, as I said, sort of really unprecedented. Obviously, there's been lots of arrangements over previous COPs where, host countries have hosted, the physical COP for countries that may not have been able to do so. But there was always a very clear presidency role held by one country to really span the entire process, both the negotiations as well as the action agenda, to, again, reflect more of a cohesive package of outcomes for the COP as a whole. We won't have that for COP31. So I think Australia will need to be creative in how it navigates that and really come back to some of those first principles of why it embarked upon a joint bid with the Pacific in the first place, and make sure that we don't lose sight of that in these new arrangements. And really looking beyond the pre-COP. I think the pre-COP will be a really important moment for the Pacific, but I think Australia and Turkey really needs to find ways to amplify Pacific priorities at COP31 itself.
I mean, Australia has long argued for a sort of joint Australian-Pacific COP, right? Are there any frameworks in the region that have been Pacific-led that could sort of help with the thematic priorities of COP31?
So I think there's lots of opportunities. I mean, there has been a lot of talk around, had that have been held by Australia and the Pacific in the region, in Adelaide, as you were suggesting earlier. The Pacific, Australia, we are all large ocean states. So I think there was a lot of opportunity, particularly after the COP was held in the Amazon, to perhaps shift global attention around what can be done in terms of that ocean climate nexus, particularly financing for solutions in this space, both mitigation and adaptation. I think that was a big call from many aspects of the climate policy space for that to be a bit of an opportunity for COP31. So again, how can we still bring that flavour to the pre-COP, but how can we really move some big initiatives? Brazil had a number of notable initiatives, particularly around finance, that it advanced. How can we do the same?
Just wondering as well, sorry if I can just step in here. The subtext to all this is that Australia and Turkey will have to be doing this without the typical leadership that you're seeing on this from the US. What are your expectations of what can actually be achieved amid all this?
I mean, the US was also sort of not, has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement ahead of Brazil. So I think we also saw the, lack of really active participation as a party to the Paris Agreement in Belém as well. So I think that will continue. And I think that only speaks again to the need for more regional, multipolar type approaches to climate action. How can we bridge new coalitions, new alliances, and really coalesce around some of these key messages around protecting the most vulnerable, responding to the science, responding to the urgency. I think that will be really critical for COP31, picking up on some of those issues that came out of COP30.
Eliza Northrop, good to have you with us, Director at UNSW Center for Sustainable Development Reform. We have more on Australia ahead every Tuesday at 11:40 a.m. if you're watching in Sydney, 8:40 a.m. in Hong Kong.
Plus, you can tune into the Bloomberg Australia podcast, which delves into the biggest stories shaping the country's role in global business. Find it on Apple, Spotify, or Bloomberg.com.